Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome an accomplished and well-respected environmental activist from Manila, Philippines, Mr. Juan Hernandez. Juan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ashutosh, and really pleased to be on your show today.
Thank you. Juan is a global coordinator for Break Free from Plastic. So, Juan, before we talk about environmental challenges and activism, tell me about your own journey in brief and what got you interested in working for the environment.
Okay, I'll try to make this long story as short as I can. I've been in environmental activism for about 30 years now. Before this, I was teaching literature in the university, and I was doing a bit of writing here and there, but I was also doing a lot of volunteering with various civic groups. And one instance was I was deployed as a volunteer to help in the rehabilitation of a town in central Philippines called Ormoc that was then devastated by a typhoon. It was early 1990s, so not everything was attributed to climate change, but it was freakish in the sense that it got an abnormal amount of rainfall on this island, and that was inundated by flash floods from the Nuded Mountains, and that resulted in deaths of around 8,000 people in one night. So I was deployed the following day to help with the rehabilitation effort. And what I saw there was just horrific. You have bodies sticking in the mud, and we were like pulling bodies of children and women and taking them to a common graveyard. So that to me was like unforgettably horrific, etched in my memory. And actually, for me, I would consider my turning point in terms of finding my purpose and what I want to do moving forward. And that's how I found myself.
And thank you so much for everything that you are doing to give back to the environment. That's fantastic. Yeah. Juan, what do you consider the most pressing environmental challenges facing our world today?
There are many. Of course, climate change is top of mind. People are already experiencing it. They say we entered the period of consequences. Right? So every day is a record in terms of extreme weather, in terms of temperature rise or increases. But also we are seeing many other planetary crises coming to the fore, like there's a biodiversity crisis. Species extinction is on the horizon for many species. And then there's pollution. And I don't know if you're familiar with this concept of planetary boundaries, but according to latest research by groups who've been monitoring this for years, we've already breached a number of these planetary boundaries, so including climate change, pollution, and biodiversity threats as well. So what we have, if you ask me what's the greatest threat, it's really a polycrisis that we're living in, right? And unless drastic changes happen in the way we live and the way our systems are operating, we're not going to get out of this quickly and safely.
Amazing. And you focus a lot on plastic. I wanted to ask you, how has the global plastic pollution crisis evolved over the last few years?
Yeah, good question, Ashutosh. Actually, when I started working, I've been working on waste issues for many years, and plastics has often been associated with waste management, littering, and you're familiar with cleanup campaigns. That's always been the narrative around plastics. And then we found plastics proliferating also in the oceans, killing marine life, so it became an issue of ocean pollution, and you have the gyres in the Pacific and the world's oceans as proof of this unsustainable material now proliferating everywhere in the planet. So from a waste management issue, this has moved towards looking at it's not just a waste management concern, it's not just a marine pollution issue, but also if you look at the full life cycle of plastics, then you realize that it also contributes to climate change, it contributes to biodiversity loss and extinction, and it also contributes to increase in pollution, toxics in the environment, in our bodies, in our babies. The latest science actually scary because now it seems that everyone's contaminated and polluted with plastics, and the effects on our health are still, coming to the surface. But one thing cannot be denied. I mean, they're in our food, they're in our water supply, they're already in our bodies.
Can you talk a little bit more about the impact of plastic pollution on the marine ecosystems and on human health?
On the marine ecosystems, I think it's very well documented, and you could actually see it on YouTube. You've probably seen that video of the turtle with the plastic straw being pulled out of its nostrils. But then there's more horrific examples. So we know that plastics killing marine mammals, and sometimes they mistake plastic for food, and so that's one way that plastics is also getting into our food chain. And the other thing is there's also latest science that show that when plastics break down, when they're in the oceans, in the open, they break down into smaller pieces of plastics called micro nanoplastics, and it's been determined that they actually also delay, or shall we say, affect the ability of the oceans to sequester or absorb carbon. So in a way, that's also limiting our ability to respond to the climate crisis. And at the same time, so talking about the entire life cycle of plastics, we know that 99% of plastics manufactured today come from fossil fuels. So you can already make the connections, right? That the production of more plastics will only lead to more climate changing emissions as well.
Well said. And the other question I wanted to get your perspective on, and you and I both come from emerging economies. The debate is often, how can we balance economic development with environmental sustainability in emerging economies?
Yeah, and this has been the debate of our age, right? The idea of sustainable development. How do we get it right? And I think the way to do it, the way to get to this balance, as you call it, is really to leapfrog over the mistakes of the early development that we've seen, particularly in the developed or industrialized countries. We know that the climate consequences that we're experiencing at the moment, or we're going through at the moment, they're due to the legacy of pollution from the development that they spawned. How do we leapfrog from those mistakes and not repeat those mistakes, but rather follow a different pathway that will still meet the needs, quality of life requirements of our people in the global south or in the developing world, without exacerbating the current crisis. The sad thing is that, of course, we use many countries, yours and mine included, we use this development concept, this right to development, as an excuse to continue doing things that have brought us to this state in the first place, right? When in fact what we should be doing is seeing how we could leapfrog without necessarily sacrificing the development rights or the ability of our people to meet their needs.
Well said.
So leapfrogging is important, and that applies to energy systems, that applies to transport, that applies even to plastics. I mean, there are alternatives to plastics, and you don't need to be producing what I call stupid plastics, single-use, throwaway, disposable plastics to
Correct.
deliver what the public needs. Right?
Correct. Correct. The other question that I had one for you is how can businesses be incentivized to adopt more sustainable practices and reduce their environmental footprint?
Yeah, this question requires a longish, elaborate answer. But let me just say, probably the problem is, of course, the current bad systems, right, in place. The systems that continue to promote the use of coal, for example, the use of fossil fuels for energy or for transport. They're embedded in the systems, that we currently operate in, and we need to move away from these systems. And how do you do that? One way is maybe through the financing flows, because a lot of incentives and subsidies have gone into the use of fossil fuels to maintain and reinforce those polluting practices, those polluting systems. We need to shift those financial flows to the alternatives, right? Decarbonization, for example, means renewable energy. Shifting the flows to renewable energy development, shifting the flows to carbon-free transport systems, mobility systems that are not dependent or fixated on fossil fuels. And in the case of plastics, shifting investments to reuse or refill systems, which, by the way, you and I know, growing up, we experienced the world without too much plastic, and we know we did quite well. Not to say we need to go back to the Stone Age, but that there are those systems that were already in place before all this massive commercialization and deployment of plastic packaging. So we need to go back to those systems. So and really, try to extend our creativity and innovation towards the set of practices that take us in the right direction.
And when it comes to enforcing environmental regulations, what are some of the biggest challenges you have seen?
Well, in the global south, I think it's quite, we know for a fact that there's not enough resources to prioritize, implement environmental rules and regulations, even occupational safety rules. This is one reason why we're seeing massive migration of dirty technologies from the north to the south, because they want to take advantage of those laxer rules and regulations. It's also the reason why we keep seeing this dumping, or in the guise of trade, dumping of hazardous and the plastic waste from OECD or industrialized countries to the developing world, developing countries. Because they want to take advantage of the fact that here there are many loopholes, and entities and polluters can get away with non-implementation of environmental rules and occupational safety standards. So they're basically gaming that system, and that needs to stop.
Well said. And what, in your view, are the potential long-term consequences if current environmental challenges are not addressed? And this is for a lot of my young viewers and listeners.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we've already breached a number of planetary boundaries. When we talk of climate change, we know that to get to that limit of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees to avert the worst impacts, of catastrophic climate change, that we're already sort of skimming beyond that level, and the window for action is narrowing. What that means, of course, if we continue doing what we're doing, is we will be denying future generations, we'll be denying our children, our grandchildren, of the possibilities that were, available to us. And we're sort of limiting their possibilities and their quality of life in the future. Their very survival is at stake, especially when one looks at what science tells us in terms of how catastrophic climate change would look like, for the future.
Great response. What, in your view, Fawn, is the role of technology and innovation in solving environmental issues?
Yeah, technology has a role to play, but we cannot be too fixated on technological solutions alone, right? And it's also a question of what kind of technology. Is it technology that just reinforces the status quo? So, for example, when in the climate space, when we talk of technology, the industry would always come with a what you call a typical back-end technological response, like carbon capture or storage, or trying to address the problem after you've created it, or so-called geoengineering solutions to climate change, when the technology should be applied at the front end. Like, how do you avoid the problem in the first place, right? That is the wisdom that is needed in the application of technologies. How do we use technology so we avoid the problem in the first place? Not deal with it once you've already created it. That is typical back-end thinking. It's very clever, but it's not wise, right? Again, it's about the choices we make that take us to the right direction, rather than choices that keep us fixated in the current cycles of vicious cycles of poverty and destruction.
Well said. So one more question, and then I have a few questions on activism. Tell me a little bit more about the Break Free from Plastic movement, and how do you coordinate efforts among your over 2,500 organizations?
Yeah, so Break Free from Plastic, Ashutosh, we were founded in 2016, 2017. That's when we started from a group of 60 nonprofits, NGOs, had now, expanded to more than 3,000, almost 3,500 actually, groups globally present in more than 180 plus countries. And so what binds us together is really adherence to a common agreed, shall we say, global strategy on how we approach plastics. And that means approaching plastics, looking at the entire, what you call, value chain or life cycle, from extraction, production, use, all the way to disposal. And we realize that the problem is, of course, this adherence or this belief in this linear model of development, right? And we wanted to move this linear system to a system that is maybe cyclical and respectful of nature and planetary boundaries. So how we keep the movement together, it's this, the strategy keeps us together. We are tight on our strategy, even if we have members working on waste issues at the, that side of the spectrum. We have also members working at the front end of addressing supply issues. Like, these are groups, environmental justice, indigenous communities fighting fossil fuel expansion or petrochemical expansion. And linking those stories together, that's what makes this a strong movement, because your struggle at the one side of the spectrum connects with the struggles those in the front lines. The strategy, for the most part, is what has kept us together.
Amazing, amazing. So time for a few more questions for you on environmental activism. I mean, as an activist, let me start by asking you that, can you describe a particularly challenging moment in your activism career, and how did you overcome this?
Okay, you get me thinking there. Well, there was one instance in my, shall we say, my early, maybe first decade of being, I started as a anti-toxics campaigner for Greenpeace. And there was one time we were doing this research following this trail of toxic poisons or pesticides that have been donated to South Asian countries. So I was part of a small group doing research following this trail of persistent pesticides in Nepal, in Bangladesh, in India, in Pakistan. And we were just sort of visiting old factories, or we were looking at godowns, or what you call places where those obsolete pesticides have been stockpiled, really nasty, toxic stuff. But my problem was, I wasn't prepared for it, because I was only talking to local villagers, and then being shown the actual sites without any protection. I nearly died because of that experience, because after I returned from my research, my immune system collapsed, and I suppose that's due to toxic exposure, and I nearly died because of heart failure. So for me, that was quite instructive. Also, I mean, you need to protect yourself also. But to me, the what I take away from that was, so that was just research I did, right? But then you have many communities and many groups that are facing this type of toxics, industrial dirty development in their backyards, and practically living under that cloud day and night. And here I am just, doing this bit of research. So for me, that was life-changing also in a way, because then we needed to help communities confront those types of dirty development in their own backyard. Sometimes and most of the time they're the last to know, right? But they're the first to experience the impacts. So making them developing their ability to confront these problems and take control of their destinies, to me, is a key takeaway moment.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing this. One have time for two more questions. How do you see the role of social media in modern environmental activism?
It's well, we've seen, and we've been using social media in spreading, in busting the myths, the lies, for example, around recycling, the limitations of plastic recycling, the greenwashing often deployed by industry that's desperate to maintain the status quo. We've been using social media for that, but the other side is also using social media, right? So there is a lot of contending narratives out there, and not to mention the fake news, and the use of AI now. All this is making campaigning very difficult, right? There's so much noise. How do you elevate yourself so that you're heard? Is a question, right? And so you need to be more creative. You need to be reaching out to other voices as well, like yours, so we could reach more audiences, enlighten more people, and just build awareness. But really, this battle of narratives has never been more difficult. When I started, this wasn't like this. Right? We have our trusted media channels. We use those media channels to create debate and spur decisions. Based on that. Now it's so difficult. Everyone has an opinion. Everyone, not to say that's bad, but there's also willful use of social media to distort, to delay, to obfuscate, and to distract. So how do we deal with this destruction in the age of distraction, as one would call it?
Well said.
And social media, of course, is what you call, it's a double-edged, and you need to be able to maximize using your creative abilities, the use of it to support your causes.
Wonderful. One on that note, I just want to say thank you so much for speaking to me about your own journey. Thank you for speaking to me about so many different aspects of the environment, plastic, and all the challenges that the world faces with plastic, and all the amazing work your organization, Break Free from Plastic, is doing. Thank you again, and good luck to you.
Thank you, Ashutosh. I really appreciate it. I hope we could speak again one more time
Thank you.
next time.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.